Hi, I'm Jeanette, the North Down Coach. Thanks for joining me today because I am going to be continuing my series on what to do after layoff. And if that describes you, you're going to want to stick around because I'm sharing two, I think, really useful tools that I think is going to be really helpful to you in moving you forward. Even if you find yourself at this stage mired in grief, in anger, in resentment, and all of those sorts of negative emotions, I think that there's probably in the midst of all of that, I'd hazard a guess, a little glimmer of hope and possibility. And that's what we want to work with today, because I think that there are some interesting things that can come out of this, and these tools are really helpful in discovering more. So what are these tools? Well, there are a couple of tools that I frequently utilize within my coaching practice, working with my career coaching clients, whether that they might be, experiencing layoff or thinking about a career transition of a minor scale or a career transition of a major scale. These are really helpful tools, and I think they will be to you too if you are in this situation. So without further ado, the first one is called the logical levels of change. And I'll give you a link in the description box for where you can get more details, but you can also just do a search on the internet and the overall framework will come up. It is not a career-specific model or framework. Rather, this is a framework that looks at a person's relationship to a particular change or to a goal, because isn't a goal really about a change? So this framework, when utilized in this circumstances, has you first think about, okay, well, what's the particular change or goal that you're entertaining? And let's take the layoff situation. Really, the goal is going to be somewhere in the category of, well, I want to find another position and find one that brings me, fulfillment, all of those sorts of things. That's really what you're examining for the framework at this point. And then, as the title of the framework suggests, there are a series of levels, called logical levels after all, that each have two questions associated with them. And as you go through the framework, it really goes from a more surface level to really deep, deep, deep. So what do I mean by that? Well, the first level is described as environment. So it's everything that's external to you. I often describe it as the kitchen drawer of levels. The kitchen drawer that holds a whole bunch of different things that you don't know what to do with. That's essentially external. So it could be about where you work, who you work with, what the commute is like, all sorts of details from, soup to nuts. And in that level, the first question is, what is it about your current environment that is causing you to have this particular goal? And of course, on a very practical nature, we know that, well, what is it about the particular environment? Well, you've been laid off. But imagine that really like this. If you're entertaining the idea of maybe there's a possibility of something new and different and you want to discover it, then the idea is, okay, moving from what you had, what are some of the other possibilities? So really thinking about maybe some of the things that were not a great fit for you in the position that you're coming from would be some of the answers to that question. And then there's a forward-facing question around, well, what do you want to have in your environment? And then the framework goes through to the next level, which is about behavior. So what is it that I am saying and doing that is causing me to have this goal? And that starts to get into some more mindset related questions and really some of the internal dialogue, etc. And then there's a forward facing question there. Then we look at some of the practical skills and capabilities. What skills and capabilities are causing, this question, right? And then what skills and capabilities will you need moving forward? There are some aspects of it that are a little chicken and egg that are hard to say because that's in fact why you're in the model. But what is interesting about the process of going through the model is you start to see the various patterns emerge because they don't all the things that come to mind don't easily fit into the categories, and you start to see them repeat. You start to see some of the connections in the concepts. You start to see one or two maybe little nuances or nuggets start to emerge that you weren't even consciously aware of. When you get to kind of the end point of the model, we're talking about you're really deep in questions around, first values, but then, mission and purpose, and really, significant emotional related questions, etc. And I find working through this framework to be very useful at this stage because often when we think, especially if we have a number of years in our particular chosen career and are thinking about, some sort of a transition or a pivot, we're like, well, I don't want to go back to the basics of I don't need to do a values assessment or, what my interests are or, my skills. I know those things. Well, that is so true. You don't need to do those different individual assessments necessarily because this model pulls that all together in a much more organic and a natural way. The second model is SWOT analysis, but SWOT analysis from the perspective of developing a career strategy. So SWOT is SWOT, and it stands for Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threats. And it's a model or a framework that's often utilized when an individual or an organization, or not an individual, when an organization or a team is working on setting strategic direction, setting a strategy. In this particular case, we're utilizing it on an individual basis to set career strategy. And so we're really looking at what individual strengths, weaknesses, and then what are the external or environmental opportunities and threats, and then looking at how that all comes together to provide a sense of, well, then what's the career strategy out of that? I have developed specific questions for each of those four quadrants, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and threats that are very career specific. And that helps to really narrow the focus to put this we're developing a career strategy framework on this one. So together, those two tools I would offer will give you a ton of useful, insightful information to inform what are your next steps and how can you move forward in a positive way, despite the grief and the anxiety and the despair associated with the layoff. This is that forward step that feels positive and engaging and motivating. And once you're starting on that path, then you can build that momentum to move forward. I would be happy to share just a worksheet around this if that would be useful. Just drop me either a note in the comments or direct message me or reach out in any of the forms of contact that I have in the description box. I'm happy to provide that for you. I am also happy to provide a free, no strings attached career strategy coaching session if that would be of interest to you. And I will drop the link in the description box so that you have that as well. So I hope that this is helpful. I know it will be because I've seen it work with so many of my coaching clients. So I am happy to share that with you today. I hope you have a good week ahead, and I will see you again next week. Take care.